phone rang loudly in the quiet night, tearing apart Dr. Lamb's restless sleep in the hospital's on-call room. He woke up with a start, sweat beading on his forehead, a feeling of fatigue clinging to his body after long shifts. He was too familiar with emergency calls, but this time the urgent voice of the emergency nurse on the other end of the line made him shiver. Dr. Lamb, there is a woman with severe pre-eclampsia being brought in. Her condition is critical. She needs to be delivered by cesarean section immediately. His drowsiness vanished. Lamb jumped up, grabbed the blouse hanging on the chair, and rushed out of the on-call room. The sound of shoes hitting the cold tile floor echoed loudly in the quiet hospital corridor. Outside, the ambulance siren wailed, tearing apart the quiet space of the late night. He felt the pressure on his shoulders. A case of pre-eclampsia was not only dangerous for the mother, but also threatened the life of the unborn child. The ambulance rushed into the hospital yard, the wheels screeching on the pavement. The door opened, a nurse jumped out, shouting, 38 weeks pregnant, blood pressure 170/110, need to have surgery immediately. On the stretcher, a young girl, Huang Nyok, 23 years old, lay curled up, her face pale, her whole body trembling. Sweat poured down her forehead, her breathing was rapid. Lamb bent down, placing his hand on her forehead, burning hot. Nyok's eyes opened, her pupils dilated, her gaze filled with fear. Doctor, my child, is he okay? Her voice was weak, lost in pain. Lamb squeezed her hand, his voice low but determined. We will do everything we can. You have to hold on. Nyok nodded slightly, her pale lips moving as if she wanted to say more, but the pain came and made her grit her teeth and endure. There was no time to hesitate, Lamb shouted. Prepare the operating room, now! Call the anesthesia and resuscitation team. The white operating room was brightly lit under the surgical lights. The sound of footsteps, the sound of a trolley, the sound of the door opening continuously rang out. The pregnant woman Huang Gok was brought in. Lamb took the opportunity to look through the records. She was pregnant with her first child, had no history of serious medical conditions, but pre-eclampsia appeared at 37 weeks and progressed too quickly. He frowned, wondering why a healthy young girl had fallen into such a critical condition. A young nurse ran over, put her hand on his shoulder, her voice worried. Doctor, she wants to say something before the anesthesia. Lamb turned around. Nyok looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, her weak voice seemed to melt into the air. If anything happens, save my child first. The words were like a knife stabbing Lamb's heart. He had heard similar words from many mothers throughout his career, but each time it made him ache. Don't say that. You and your baby will be fine, I promise. Nyok smiled softly, tears rolling down her cheeks, then fell asleep under the effects of anesthesia. The door to the operating room closed. The real battle began. The air in the operating room was as tense as a bowstring. Lamb took a deep breath, holding out both hands for the nurse to put on sterile gloves. The scalpel flashed under the light. With one cut, blood soaked into the white gauze. He separated each layer of tissue, carefully pressing the uterus. Every action had to be absolutely precise. Even the slightest deviation could affect the fetus. It's almost there. Prepare the fetal recovery equipment. The atmosphere became thick. Lamb gently supported the baby, carefully pulling it out of the mother's womb. But then something no one expected happened. The baby didn't cry. The silence was eerily quiet. Lamb frowned, quickly cut the umbilical cord, and handed the baby to the neonatal resuscitation team. A nurse wrapped a towel around the baby, patted his back, but there was no response. No crying, no sound at all. Put in a suction tube, stimulate breathing now, Lamb ordered, his voice urgent. The resuscitation team worked urgently. 1, 2, 3, 4, still no response. Lamb had handled hundreds of cesarean sections, but had never encountered a situation like this. At that moment, a small sound rang out, as weak as the wind, not a cry, but more like a whisper. Everyone stood still, their eyes focused on the baby. The baby slowly opened its eyes, a pair of black, round eyes looking straight into the light of the operating room. Lamb was slightly startled. There was something different, but he didn't have time to think too much. The resuscitation doctor checked the heart rate and nodded. Heart rate is stable, starting to react. Lamb breathed a sigh of relief, but in his heart, a big question gradually formed. Why didn't the baby cry from the beginning? After the surgery, Huang Yang was taken to the resuscitation room, and the baby was transferred to the special care area for monitoring. Lamb took off his gloves and washed his tired hands, but the feeling of tension still did not disappear. It was unusual for a newborn baby not to cry when born, but what haunted him the most were the baby's eyes. Bright, deep, unlike the hazy gaze of a newborn. A few hours later, the sky was getting light. Lamb returned to the resuscitation room to check on God. She was awake. Her face was still pale, but her eyes had a bit of life. Seeing him enter, she tried to get up. Doctor, is my child okay? He's fine. Just need to monitor him for a few more days. You don't need to worry too much. Ngok breathed a sigh of relief, her hands clasped tightly together, her fingers trembling. Doctor, when I was in a coma, I had a strange dream. Lamb frowned slightly. What did you dream about? Gok hesitated, her eyes confused. I saw myself in a very dark, cold place. Then a small light appeared. I saw my child in that light, but strangely, he didn't cry. He just looked at me, then whispered something. Lamb's heart skipped a beat. What did he say? Gok clenched her hands, her eyes slightly panicked. I couldn't hear clearly. Just a very small, very distant sound, like a whisper. Lamb felt the back of his neck go cold. A whisper, not a cry, not a laugh, but a whisper. Was it the same sound he and the team had heard in the operating room? He smiled awkwardly. Maybe it's just the anesthesia. You should rest more. I'll keep an eye on the baby. Gok nodded, but her eyes were still thoughtful. Lamb left the room, but a stream of thoughts kept lingering in his mind. If it was just a coincidence, why wouldn't this uneasy feeling leave him? That night, even though his shift was over, Lamb still stopped by the intensive care unit. A nurse was standing next to the incubator, looking intently at the baby. What's wrong? Lamb asked. The nurse was startled, turned around, her eyes confused. No, nothing, doctor. It's just, I think this baby is different from other newborns. What's different? The nurse hesitated. Doctor, have you ever seen a newborn baby with its eyes open for so long? I've been here for 2 hours and it's barely closed. Lamb was stunned and walked closer to the incubator. The baby lay there, its body small, its skin rosy, but its eyes bright and focused, not dreamy like a normal newborn. Suddenly, the baby moved slightly, turned his head and looked straight into his eyes. Their eyes met. A strange feeling ran down Lamb's spine. There was no sign of illness, but there was something very different. Lamb leaned closer, observing every detail on the baby's face. The breathing was steady. The heartbeat was steady. He took the stethoscope and pressed it against the baby's chest. The heart was beating strongly and clearly. Then suddenly, a tiny sound rang out, very soft but clear. Dad! Lamb jumped, his hand almost dropping the stethoscope. The nurse standing next to him opened her mouth wide, stepped back, her eyes wide open in surprise. Doctor? Do you hear that? Lamb's heart was pounding. He turned to the nurse. Are you sure you didn't hear wrong? She shook her head repeatedly, her face pale. No, doctor, I heard it very clearly. It was like the baby was whispering. Lamb bent down to look at the baby again. The baby's lips were closed, her face calm as if she had never made a sound. But he wasn't crazy. He heard it. The nurse heard it too. The room became strangely cold. Doctor, is it possible? The nurse hesitated, not daring to continue. Lamb understood what she was thinking. He thought the same thing, but he couldn't accept such an absurdity. A newborn baby couldn't speak? Never before in the history of medicine. He took a deep breath, pushing away the chaotic thoughts. Don't tell anyone about this. The nurse nodded immediately. They both understood that if this news spread, the baby's life would never be normal. Lamb left the intensive care unit, but the strange feeling still clung to him. A newborn baby could speak. That went against all medical knowledge. He walked quickly through the hallway, trying to organize his thoughts. There were too many abnormalities. The baby didn't cry, opened her eyes for hours, and now spoke clearly. He stopped in front of Ngyok's recovery room. She was awake, her eyes tired but no longer panicked. Seeing him, she asked softly, Doctor, is my baby okay? He is fine. We are monitoring him further. Yank breathed a sigh of relief, but her eyes still showed something strange. Doctor, I have a very strange feeling about my child. Lamb sat down. How? Yank looked at him, her eyes confused. Ever since I was pregnant, I felt that he was special. There were times when I was sad. I felt warm in my stomach, as if someone was comforting me. There were nights when I dreamed that my child looked at me, said something. Lamb was silent. Ngok continued. Last night, I heard my child calling me. It wasn't a cry, but a voice. Lamb's heart pounded. He kept his voice calm. Are you sure you weren't dreaming? Ngok shook her head. No, I'm awake. I heard him calling me. Lamb felt the uneasiness spreading. He reassured Ngok, but when he left the room, he knew this wasn't an illusion. He, the nurse, and now Ngok, they all heard it. Lamb decided not to let this pass as a strange phenomenon. He called Dr. Tan, a pediatric psychologist, his close friend. Tan, can you come to the hospital right away? I have a very special case. 30 minutes later, Tan entered Lamb's office, listening to Lamb recount the whole incident. From the surgery, the baby's strange eyes, to the whispers, Tan was silent, his eyes thoughtful. Are you sure that was a real voice? Not just me, the nurse and the baby's mother heard it too. Tan frowned. Newborns can't speak. Could it be a neurological abnormality? I checked. The baby's brain is normal. Tan stood up. I need to see the baby. In the intensive care unit, the baby was still lying in the incubator, eyes wide open, staring into space. Fan bent down to observe. Then the baby turned its head to look straight at him. Fan was slightly startled. Suddenly a small sound rang out. Mom! Fan stood still, his face pale. Lamb asked, Did you hear that? Fan nodded slowly. Lamb, maybe we are facing something beyond medicine. Both were silent. A nurse came in, heard the sound, and dropped the documents. Lamb ordered to keep it a secret. He knew that if this news got out, the baby would become a research subject and the baby's family would no longer have peace. 3 days later, Lamb conducted secret tests, measuring brainwaves, checking reflexes. The results? The baby was completely normal. But the baby did not cry and occasionally made meaningful sounds. Mom, dad, yes, as if he had been able to speak since birth. Gonok recovered quickly, but also realized that her child was unusual. One afternoon, she asked Lamb, "Doctor, do you believe in miracles?" "What do you mean?" "I believe my child is special." Lamb did not answer right away. Special? A gift or a mystery? On the day of discharge, he stood watching Walk carry the baby into the car. She turned back. "Thank you, doctor. If anything happens, I will call." As the car slowly disappeared, Lamb knew that this story was not over. That little girl was not an ordinary child. Her eyes, deep, alert, would haunt him forever. After the car carrying Huangok and the baby gradually disappeared down the road leading out of the hospital, Dr. Lamb stood still for a long time. The night wind blew through the open corridor, carrying the bitter cold of March. He pulled up the collar of his blouse, but the cold in his heart was not due to the weather. The baby's eyes, deep, alert, without the innocence of a newborn, kept appearing in his mind like an unanswered question. Lamb returned to the office, sat down on the chair, his hands unconsciously tapping on the table. He had witnessed thousands of births, from weak premature babies to healthy babies crying out as soon as they left their mother's womb. But he had never encountered a case like this. A baby that doesn't cry, opens its eyes for hours, and makes sounds that sound like words. It's not just unusual, it goes against every biological rule he knows. The phone rings, interrupting his thoughts. "It's Dr. Zen. Lamb, are you okay? I just got home, but I still can't sleep. What happened today?" Ten's voice drops as if he's struggling with what he's just witnessed. "I'm not okay either," Lamb replies, his voice hoarse. "What do you think about this? What's really going on?" Thon is silent for a moment. "I don't know, but I'm sure of one thing. We can't ignore it. The baby isn't normal, but not in a pathological sense. There's something bigger." "What do you mean? Supernatural?" Lamb lets out a faint laugh, but the laugh doesn't hide his unease. "I wouldn't say that. I'm a doctor, not a psychic, but you have to admit all the tests are normal, and the baby is still doing inexplicable things. What are you going to do next?" Lamb sighed. "I don't know yet, but first, I need to keep this under control. If it gets out, you know what will happen." "I understand, but Lamb, you can't do this alone. If you need help, I'll help. Call me anytime." The call ended. Lamb looked out the window, the streetlights dim in the night fog. He knew Tuang was right. This wasn't something he could handle on his own, but he couldn't let anyone else know either, at least not yet. More than 20 kilometers from the hospital, in a small house on the outskirts of the city, Huang Gok sat on the bed, holding her little daughter tightly in her arms. The first night back home after the surgery, she felt both relieved and heavy. The little girl lay quietly in her arms, her big round eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling. No crying, no whimpering, just strangely silent. Nyok gently stroked the baby's thin hair, whispering, "Baby, are you okay? Mom is here with you." Suddenly, the baby moved slightly, turned his head to look straight into her eyes. A tiny sound rang out, weak but clear. "Mom?" Nook was startled, almost dropping the baby. Her heart was pounding. Her breathing became rapid. She hugged the baby tighter, her eyes blurred with tears. "What did you just say? You called mommy?" The baby did not respond, just looked at her, his eyes clear as if he understood everything. Nook trembled as she put the baby down on the crib, covering her face with both hands. She did not know whether to be happy or scared. Ever since she was pregnant, she had felt something unusual. Strange dreams, a sudden feeling of warmth in her belly, as if the baby was communicating with her before it was even born. But now, when she clearly heard the word mother from her child's mouth, she couldn't deny. Her daughter was not like other children. The door opened slightly. Lan Yak's older sister walked in, holding a cup of hot milk. "Lan Yak, drink this to regain your strength. Why is your face so pale?" Lan looked up, her eyes bewildered. "Sister, I just heard her say something." Lan smiled lightly, putting the cup of milk down on the table. "Say what? How can a newborn baby talk? I was so tired that I imagined it." "No, sister, I heard it clearly. She said mother." Long frowned, looking down at the crib. The baby girl was still lying still, her eyes wide open, looking at the two of them. "You must have heard wrong. Just gave birth and had a C-section. You need to rest. Don't think too much." Her eyes didn't reply. She knew her sister didn't believe it, but that voice was too clear, not an illusion. But she didn't dare tell any more. If even her sister didn't believe her, who would believe her? The next morning, Lam returned to the hospital, even though it wasn't his shift. He needed to see Nurse Hien, the one who witnessed the moment the baby uttered the word dad in the intensive care unit. Hien was a young nurse, having been in the profession for less than 2 years, but she had a sharp intuition and rare carefulness. Lam found Hien in the staff break room, sitting and writing something down. Seeing him, she stood up in surprise. "Dr. Lam, what do you want from me?" Hien, what happened that night? Do you still remember? Hien's face turned pale, but she nodded. I can't forget it, that voice. I heard it very clearly. Lam pulled a chair and sat down, his voice low. I need you to help me with something, but absolutely don't let anyone know. Hien looked at him, her eyes both curious and worried. What is it? I want to keep an eye on the baby, not here, but after he's discharged. I need to know if this phenomenon happens again. Hien hesitated. But, doctor, what if we get caught? I don't want to cause trouble. No one will know. I just need you to observe from a distance and take notes if anything unusual happens. You're the only one besides me and Dr. Tan who witnessed it. Hien bit her lip, then nodded. Okay, but doctor, what do you think this is? I get chills every time I think about it. Lam sighed. I don't know either, but I have to find out. For the baby and for ourselves. Hien agreed, though he was still full of doubts. Lam left the break room, feeling like he had just pulled another person into a mysterious vortex that he couldn't control. That night, Nyok dreamed again. She saw herself standing in a dark space, without sound, without light. Then a small light appeared, growing larger, and in that light, her daughter appeared. She did not cry, did not laugh, just looked at her with deep eyes. Her lips moved, making a small sound, but Guk could not hear clearly. She reached out to her, but the light suddenly went out, and she woke up with a start. Guk sat up, sweat drenching her back. Beside her, the little girl lay in the crib, eyes still open, looking at her. A creepy feeling ran down her spine. She whispered, Child, what did you just say in my dream? The child did not answer, but those eyes seemed to penetrate her soul. Ingkok hugged her child, tears rolling down. She did not know what she was facing, but she was sure of one thing. Her daughter was not normal. The next morning, Ingkok called Lam. Her voice trembled. Doctor, I need to see you. There is something about the child. Lam agreed immediately. He knew this secret could not be hidden forever. Lam went to Nok's house. The small house was in the suburbs, quiet and isolated. Nok greeted him with a worried look, holding her daughter in her arms. The girl was still silent, her bright eyes looking at Lam as if she recognized him. Doctor, I don't know what to say, but she talked again. Last night, she said, Mommy. Lam sat down, trying to keep his voice calm. Are you sure? Nork nodded. I'm not crazy. I heard it clearly. And I dreamed of her. She looked at me, said something, but I didn't understand. Lam looked at the little girl. Suddenly, she turned her head. Her tiny lips moved, and a weak sound rang out. Daddy. Lam froze. Nok hugged her tightly, her eyes wide with surprise. Doctor! Did you hear it? I heard it, Lam replied, his voice hoarse. He leaned down close to the girl, whispering, Can you say anything else? The girl looked at him, her eyes unblinking. Then another word rang out, small but clear. Yes. Lam stepped back, his heart pounding. This was not an illusion. The child was really speaking, and it seemed to understand what was happening. Lam left Nyok's house in a confused state of mind. On the way home, he called Than, telling him everything. Than was silent for a long time, then said, Lam, I think we need a different perspective. Science has not yet explained it, but maybe this is not a medical problem. What do you mean? I don't believe in ghosts, but I've read about rare cases. Babies with special abilities from birth. Maybe you are one of those cases. Lam didn't want to believe it, but he couldn't deny the truth before his eyes. He decided to continue monitoring, but in absolute secrecy. Anne, Tan, and Hien became a small group to quietly learn about the girl, not for fame, but to protect a mystery that could change the lives of Ungok's entire family. After the meeting at Huangok's house, Dr. Lam returned to the hospital in a restless state. The baby's dad, and yes, echoed in his head like hammer blows on the wall of reason that he had built over 10 years of working. He could not deny the truth. The girl could not only speak, but also seem to understand what was going on around her. But to what extent and why? That night, Lam did not sleep. He sat in his office, the desk lamp shining on his tired face. In front of him was a pile of documents, notes on the baby's tests, from brain waves to nerve reflexes. Everything was normal without any signs of medical abnormality. But that normality was the most abnormal thing. A newborn baby could not speak, could not react like that. So what's really going on? The phone rang. It was Tan. Lam, I just looked through some old documents. There are some rare records of children who were called special. Not pathological, but some kind of evolution or something like that, but they're all legends, no scientific evidence. Lam rubbed his temples. Do you believe in that stuff? I don't, but after what we saw, do you have any other explanation? Lam was silent. He had no answer. Than continued, I think we should stop. Not because I'm scared, but because she's not an experiment. You were right. We need to protect her, not exploit her. Lam nodded. Even though Tong couldn't see. I agree. But I need to see Nyok one more time. I want to make sure she's okay. Okay, but be careful, Lam. This is bigger than we think. The call ended. Lam looked out the window. The night was pitch black with only the dim streetlights in the mist. He knew he was at a crossroads. Either continue digging deeper into the mystery or let go to protect the peace of that small family. The next morning, Lam drove to Nyok's house. He hadn't told her in advance, but his intuition told him that she needed him right now. When he knocked on the door, Lan, Nyok's older sister, opened it. Dr. Lam, why are you here? Lan's voice was slightly surprised. I want to check on Nyok and the baby. Is something wrong? Lan hesitated, then sighed. She's not feeling well. Since coming home, she's been talking nonsense about the baby. I don't know what to do. Lam walked in. Nook sat on the sofa, holding her daughter in her arms. The baby was still silent, her eyes wide open looking at him. Nook looked up, her eyes tired but shining with hope when she saw him. Doctor, I knew you would come. Lam sat down opposite. How are you? Is there anything unusual about the baby? Ngok gently stroked her daughter's hair, her voice trembling. She didn't cry, doctor, never cried, but she spoke. Last night I heard her call Mom again, and I dreamed of her. She looked at me, said something, but I didn't understand. I was scared, but I also felt she was special. Lam looked at the little girl. Those eyes met his again, and once again he felt a chill run down his spine. He whispered, do you want to say something? The girl moved slightly, her tiny lips moving. A weak sound rang out, love. Ngok burst into tears, hugging her daughter tightly. Lam stiffened, not knowing how to react. Love. A simple word, but from the mouth of a newborn baby, it was like an electric shock running through his body. He turned to Ngok. Did you hear that? Ngok nodded, tears rolling down her face. I heard that. Doctor, what is my child? Is she human? Lam took a deep breath. He didn't have a scientific answer, but he knew he had to say something. I don't know what she is, but I know she's your child. She's healthy, she's alive, and she loves you. That's the most important thing. Ngok looked at him, her eyes softening. She hugged her child tighter, whispering, thank you, doctor. I think... Oh, I'll accept it. Whatever she is, she's still my child. Lam nodded. He stood up, feeling as if a burden had been lifted. But as he was about to leave, the little girl turned to look at him one last time. A tiny sound rang out. Only he could hear. Thank you. Lam was stunned, but didn't turn around. He walked out of the house, closing the door, leaving Nook and her child in the silence of the room. On the way home, Lam called Than. I just saw Nook. She said it again, love and thank you. Than was silent for a long time. What are you going to do? I'll stop. No testing, no research. I'll let them live normally. Are you sure? This could be a big discovery. Lam smiled faintly. Discover for what? To make the baby a guinea pig? I don't want that. I'm a doctor, not a mad scientist. Tian sighed. I understand. I'll delete all the records. Tian also agreed to keep quiet. This matter just let it sink into oblivion. Thank you, Tian. The call ended. Lam stopped the car by the side of the road, looking up at the gray sky. He didn't know what the little girl was. A miracle of nature, an evolutionary step, or something beyond human understanding. But he knew one thing. She was a living being, and she deserved to live like any other child. A month later, Lam received a text message from Ngok. Just a few lines. Dr. Lam, the baby is fine. A child anymore, but I know she understands me. Thank you for everything. Lam smiled, putting the phone in his pocket. He wasn't sure if the baby had stopped telling the truth or just kept quiet to adapt to this world, but he hoped, whatever it was, that the baby would have a peaceful life with her mother. That day, Lam stood in the hospital hallway, watching patients come and go. Life went on, surgeries continued, but he knew he had changed. He no longer saw things through the lens of science. There were things that could not be explained, that did not need to be explained, just felt and appreciated. Somewhere in his memory, the little girl's deep eyes still appeared, like a reminder that the world was bigger than he had ever thought. But this time, he was no longer afraid. He just whispered to himself, I wish you happiness, my dear. The story ended not with a clear answer, but with acceptance and compassion. The child, a nameless mystery, did not become a research subject, was not exposed to the world. Instead, she lived like a normal child in the loving arms of her mother. Dr. Lam, Ten, and Hien chose to remain silent, not because of fear, but because they understood that sometimes protecting a living being is more important than any discovery. The mystery of the little girl may remain unsolved forever, but in that ambiguity, a clear message still resonates. Love and life transcend all boundaries of science and reason. Perhaps the miracle does not lie in understanding everything, but in knowing when to stop to preserve what is most sacred. If you like this content, please leave a comment to share your thoughts below, and subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying us in the next stories. Each like and each share of yours is not only support, but also a priceless source of encouragement for us to continue to bring more meaningful, deeper, and closer content to life. Once again, we sincerely thank you for following and listening.